It was Tuesday, July 19th, 2016, the kind of Ohio evening that turns cornfields to gold, when 20-year-old Sierah Joughin pedaled her purple bike along the quiet ribbon of County Road 6 beside her high school sweetheart, Josh Kolasinski. She was a University of Toledo student, a granddaughter who still chose home, a sister who texted back, a planner who never left people guessing, and that's why, when her bedroom light stayed dark and her phone went silent, a small whirring in her mother's chest began to bloom into dread. Hours earlier there'd been nothing but sun and laughter. Josh on his motorcycle pacing her rhythm, a quick snapshot, Sierah grinning into the wind, proof of a life mid-stride and a parting kiss a half-mile from home. "Text you later," they'd said, and then the road split and the day should have ended with the ordinary softness of summer. Instead, 10:30 p.m. brought unanswered messages, straight to voicemail calls, and a mother, Sierah Joughin, staring at an empty doorway that should have held her daughter's silhouette. In a town where evenings are punctuated by cicadas and porch lights, where distance is measured in fields and family, something had gone terribly wrong. And before the night was over, the stillness of Metamora would be broken by searchlights, squad cars, and a question that would echo across Northwest Ohio: how does a young woman vanish on a road she's ridden her whole life, within sight of home, with the sun not long set and the people who love her already waiting? The evening sun hung low over the flat expanse of rural Fulton County as Sierah's purple bicycle glided down County Road 6, her boyfriend Josh close behind on his motorcycle. It was one of those golden Midwest evenings, the air thick with the hum of crickets and the smell of cornfields, where time felt slow and safe. They had spent the afternoon riding together, laughing and talking about the future. Josh, ever protective, made sure to stay near her, the sound of his motorcycle echoing down the empty road as Sierah pedaled ahead, her ponytail catching the wind. At one point, he pulled out his phone and filmed a short Snapchat video, Sierah smiling at him over her shoulder, her cheeks flushed with sunlight, her happiness effortless. That clip would later become a piece of evidence, and a painful reminder of how quickly life can change. As they reached a familiar crossroads, Sierah told Josh she'd bike the rest of the way home, just a half-mile more. They shared a quick kiss, promised to text later, and went their separate ways, Josh turning right toward his house, Sierah continuing straight toward hers. It was 6:45 p.m. when he last saw her, the bright figure of the woman he loved disappearing between rows of corn that swayed gently in the evening breeze. Neither of them could have imagined that within those same cornfields, someone was waiting, watching, and that this quiet summer ride would be the last time anyone ever saw Sierah alive. As dusk settled over Metamora, the kind of soft, lavender light that signals the end of a peaceful summer day, everything in the Joughin household seemed calm, until small details began to feel off. When Sierah's mother, Sierah Joughin, arrived at her parents' house that evening, she immediately noticed her daughter's bedroom light was off. That in itself wasn't alarming, but for Sierah, it was unusual. She was a creature of habit, always checking in, always considerate. If she was staying with Josh or out late, she'd text or call. Hours passed. By 10 o'clock, Sierah was pacing. Then, at 10:30 p.m., her phone rang. It was Josh. His voice trembled with worrying. He asked if Sierah was home. When Sierah said no, a heavy silence hung between them before Josh confessed he'd been trying to reach her for hours. He'd sent texts, no reply. Called several times, straight to voicemail. He'd even driven by her route home, scanning the ditches and fields, but there was no sign of her. That's when panic took hold. Sierah and her family began calling hospitals, friends, anyone who might have seen her. Still nothing. The once quiet night filled with the flicker of porch lights as neighbors joined in, flashlights cutting through the dark along County Road 6. Sierah called the police and filed a missing persons report, her voice cracking as she said her daughter's name. Officers arrived and began retracing Sierah's steps, the same short stretch between the cornfields and home where she was last seen. The stillness of rural Ohio suddenly felt sinister. Every rustle of the corn, every shadow on the road seemed alive with menace. By midnight, fear had replaced reason. A mother's intuition had become certainty. Something terrible had happened. Sierah wasn't the type to disappear, and everyone who loved her knew it. The following morning, the quiet farmlands of Fulton County transformed into the epicenter of a desperate search. Deputies, volunteers, and neighbors gathered at dawn, combing through the same stretch of County Road 6 where Sierah had last been seen just hours earlier. The early light cut through the mist, revealing details that in the dark had gone unnoticed. Just a half mile from her home, Near the edge of a vast cornfield, officers spotted something strange, a patch of broken corn stalks, bent and twisted, as if someone had been dragged through them. When investigators stepped closer, the scene told a story that no one wanted to believe. A few rows in, they found Sierah's purple bike lying on its side, the front wheel turned awkwardly, the handlebars smeared with blood. The discovery chilled everyone to the bone. Scattered nearby were Sierah's sunglasses, but next to them, police found items that didn't belong to her: a second pair of sunglasses, a screwdriver, and a motorcycle helmet with what appeared to be blood on it. In a town where crime was almost unheard of, these items painted a terrifying picture. Sierah hadn't just fallen or crashed. Something, or someone, had forced her off the road. Officers marked off the area with yellow tape as more detectives arrived, their radios buzzing with urgency. The news spread quickly through the tight-knit community: a young woman missing, her bike found blooded, evidence of a struggle in the cornfield. Volunteers continued searching ditches, barns, and nearby woods, calling her name again and again into the humid summer air. But as daylight turned to evening once more, one truth became painfully clear. Sierah hadn't simply disappeared, she'd been taken. The peaceful farmlands that had always felt safe were now a crime scene, and a mother's worst fear had just become a community's nightmare. As investigators expanded their search and began interviewing locals, one name surfaced almost immediately: James Worley, a 57-year-old man who lived just a few miles from where Sierah vanished. He was known in the area as a quiet, somewhat odd man who ran a small engine repair business from his property, a 3-acre lot west of Toledo that he shared with his elderly mother and brother. When police first approached him, Worley didn't seem surprised. In fact, he appeared almost rehearsed. He told detectives that his motorcycle had broken down earlier that same day on County Road 6, the very spot where Sierah's blooded bike had been found. He said he'd lost a few items while trying to fix it: his helmet, screwdriver, sunglasses, and some fuses. The investigators exchanged uneasy glances. Those were the exact same items recovered near Sierah's bicycle. But what sent alarm bells ringing wasn't just the coincidence. It was what Worley said next. Without being asked, he blurted out, "I didn't steal anything. I didn't kill anyone." No one had accused him of either. As officers studied him closer, they noticed fresh scratches and bruises on his arms and legs, marks that looked consistent with someone who had been in a struggle or moving through rough terrain. The story about his motorcycle breaking down didn't make sense, and the timing was far too perfect. Within hours, detectives obtained a search warrant for his property. What they were about to uncover behind the walls of his quiet rural barn would turn this missing person case into one of the darkest and most disturbing crimes in Ohio's history. When investigators arrived at James Worley's property, they expected to find a garage full of tools and engine parts. Instead, what they discovered was the stuff of nightmares. Inside one of the barns, hidden carefully behind tall stacks of hay bales, was a concealed room that looked nothing like a workspace. The air inside was heavy with the smell of bleach and decay, and the deeper officers went, the more they realized they had stumbled upon something horrific. The room was outfitted like a makeshift dungeon, its walls lined with metal restraints, chains, and hooks. There was a freezer with what appeared to be traces of blood inside, rolls of duct tape, zip ties, and handcuffs scattered across a workbench. Several firearms and boxes of ammunition were stored in plain sight, along with video cameras and recording equipment set up in the corners. Detectives described the atmosphere as eerily sterile, as if someone had tried to clean it thoroughly, perhaps to erase something unspeakable. But the smell of bleach couldn't hide what had taken place there. Every detail pointed toward a calculated setup, designed not for storage or repair, but for restraint and control. Police also found women's clothing, underwear, and disturbing journals filled with ramblings and lists that hinted at violent fantasies. It was clear this wasn't the first time Worley had planned something like this, but maybe the first time it went this far. Outside, investigators searched his truck, uncovering even more incriminating items: 2 sets of handcuffs, a ski mask, zip ties, rope, and a can of mace. When detectives pressed him for answers, Worley responded with an unsettling calm, offering no remorse, no panic, only a chilling question that would echo in investigators' minds for years to come. "How do you kidnap somebody on a motorcycle?" That haunting remark confirmed what police already feared: Sierah's disappearance wasn't random. It was the work of a predator who had been waiting, watching, and preparing for a moment just like this. 3 agonizing days after Sierah vanished, on July 22, 2016, the search that had gripped all of Northwest Ohio came to a devastating end. A volunteer search team, guided by cadaver dogs, made a grim discovery in a remote cornfield about 12 miles from Worley's property. Beneath a thin layer of soil, hidden between two rows of corn, lay a shallow grave. Inside it was the body of Sierah Joughin. The once vibrant young woman who had filled her home with laughter was now the center of an unimaginable tragedy. Her body told a story of fear and resistance, her wrists and ankles bound and taped together, her hands handcuffed behind her back, and her limbs hog-tied with rope. A large yellow plastic object had been forced into her mouth and secured behind her neck, effectively gagging her. It was that object, later identified as a dog toy, that caused her death. According to the coroner, Sierah died of asphyxiation, her airway completely blocked, and it could have taken up to 10 excruciating minutes for her to lose consciousness. There were bruises along her legs and a deep cut on her forehead, injuries consistent with being struck by a hard object, possibly Worley's motorcycle helmet. Her bike, her sunglasses, the blood, all of it now made sense. The fight for her life had started right there on County Road 6 and ended in this isolated cornfield. For the investigators who stood in that field, surrounded by the rustling corn and the heavy silence of grief, it was clear that Sierah hadn't just been killed, she had been hunted. The discovery shattered any remaining hope and confirmed the nightmare that had been unfolding since that Tuesday evening. And though her killer still refused to speak, the evidence left behind, the blood, the bindings, the dungeon, would soon begin to speak for her. As the investigation unfolded, the trail of evidence against James Worley grew impossible to ignore, every new discovery tightening the noose around him. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, comparing DNA, mapping cell phone data, and reconstructing the final hours of Sierah's life. What they found was a chillingly organized pattern of predation. Sierah's blood was discovered on Worley's motorcycle and helmet, confirming that he had been the one to knock her off her bike. Traces of her DNA were also found on zip ties, duct tape, and a ski mask recovered from his property. Even the duct tape carried a horrifying double imprint, both Sierah's DNA and Worley's intertwined on its sticky surface. Investigators traced Worley's cell phone location data, revealing that on the evening of July 19th, his phone had pinged repeatedly from the exact area where Sierah disappeared. Even more telling, it stayed there for over 2 hours, before suddenly moving back to his home, and then, later that night, traveling again toward the cornfield where her body would be found. It painted a precise and damning timeline. He had waited in the cornfield with her until darkness fell, gone home to retrieve his van, and then returned to move her body. The digital evidence didn't end there. A search of his computer unearthed a disturbing history, videos, documents, and searches dating weeks before the abduction. Terms like hog-tied teen, raped forced hitchhiker, stranded helpless gag littered his browser history, some searched as early as 5 a.m. on June 24th, nearly a month before the crime. This wasn't a spontaneous act, it was a fantasy he had been rehearsing in his mind for years. In his barn, police also uncovered maps, journals, women's underwear, and recording equipment, all suggesting that Worley had planned to document his attacks. It was, in every sense, the profile of a serial predator. To investigators, the evidence spoke louder than any confession ever could. And though Worley remained silent, his property, his devices, and his DNA told the truth for him, a truth so dark and deliberate that it left no doubt. Sierah Joughin's murder was not a crime of passion, but the calculated act of a man who had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. When James Worley's trial began, the small courtroom in Fulton County overflowed with people, family members, reporters, and locals who had followed every heartbreaking update since Sierah's disappearance. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with grief and anger, as the prosecution laid out a case built on science, technology, and a trail of depravity that left little room for doubt. Fulton County Prosecutor Scott Hazelman opened with a simple statement that echoed through the courtroom: "Follow the evidence, and it will lead you to one man." One by one, jurors were shown the pieces: Sierah's blood on Worley's motorcycle, his DNA on the duct tape, and cell phone data proving his presence in the cornfield for more than 2 hours on the night she vanished. Then came the disturbing digital evidence. Investigators testified about the searches on Worley's computer, the violent pornography, the phrases like hog-tied teen and forced hitchhiker. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a window into a predator's escalating obsession. The jury heard from Dr. Cynthia Beiser, the deputy coroner who performed the autopsy. Her voice was steady but heavy as she described how a yellow plastic object, a dog toy, had been forcibly shoved into Sierah's mouth, cutting off her air supply and breaking her tooth. She explained that the injuries to Sierah's head, a deep laceration and skull fracture, were consistent with a blow from a motorcycle helmet, further cementing the prosecution's theory. When the defense took its turn, they tried to cast doubt, claiming that Worley's items were left in the field after his motorcycle supposedly broke down. They insisted the dungeon was nothing more than a pornography studio, a twisted but harmless hobby. They even suggested someone else, a mystery man in red shorts, could be responsible. But their words crumbled under the weight of the physical evidence. The jurors could see through the absurdities, through the attempts to humanize a man whose every action screamed control, violence, and planning. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned unanimous. James Worley was found guilty on all counts: aggravated murder, kidnapping, and felonious assault. The verdict brought tears, relief, and silence, a silence that felt like justice finally taking its first breath. When the day of James Worley's sentencing arrived, the courtroom was once again packed wall to wall, but this time, the energy was different. It was quieter, heavier, the kind of silence that sits on your chest. Family members clutched tissues and photographs of Sierah, while others sat in rigid stillness, waiting to see if the man who had terrorized their community would finally face the full weight of justice. When Worley entered, he looked defiant, not broken, not remorseful. He even smiled faintly as he took his seat. Before the judge spoke, he was given a chance to address the court, and for 45 long minutes, Worley rambled in a chilling monologue that left everyone uneasy. He denied everything, claimed he had been framed. He looked at Sierah's family and called her a beautiful girl, saying her death was a tragedy but insisting he had nothing to do with it. His words, flat and emotionless, only deepened the wound. The prosecutor asked for the death penalty, reminding the court that this was not a crime of impulse, but one of planning, cruelty, and domination. The defense tried to plead for mercy, arguing that Worley's so-called sexual sadism disorder should spare him execution, that life in prison would be punishment enough. But the judge saw through the excuses. He looked directly at Worley and said, "If I believed there was even the slightest chance you were innocent, I would sentence you to life in prison. But I don't. You are guilty, beyond doubt, beyond redemption." With that, he handed down the sentence: death. The room was still. No cheers, no applause, just the quiet sound of tears. Sierah's mother, Sheila, later said that while nothing could bring her daughter back, knowing he would never walk free again brought a measure of peace. As Worley was led away in handcuffs, his eyes cold and empty, it felt as though the nightmare that began on a warm July evening had finally reached its end, and justice, however late, had found its voice. In the weeks that followed the verdict, as the community tried to heal, a new and horrifying truth began to surface. This wasn't the first time James Worley had hunted a woman on a bike. When investigators dug deeper into his past, they discovered that he had been arrested back in 1990 for an eerily similar crime. The victim was Robin Gardner, a young woman cycling alone near Toledo when Worley deliberately rammed her bike with his truck, knocking her into a ditch. Pretending to offer help, he struck her over the head, handcuffed her, and forced her into his vehicle. Inside, he told her coldly, "Do what I say, or I'll kill you." "I'm serious." Robin fought back with everything she had, managing to escape through the other door while still in handcuffs. Terrified and bleeding, she ran into the road, where a passing motorcyclist stopped to help her. That act of bravery saved her life. When police arrested Worley, he spun a web of lies, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that he was merely trying to restrain her after a supposed accident. Despite the violence of the attack, Robin had a skull fracture, concussion, and deep bruises. Worley was sentenced to just 4 to 10 years in prison. He served barely 3, then walked free. For Robin, freedom never came so easily. Years later, she confessed that the trauma haunted her daily. "I can't go bird watching. I can't hike alone anymore. I loved being outdoors, and he stole that from me," she said. The parallels between her story and Sierah's were impossible to ignore: the bike, the isolation, the violence. It became painfully clear that if Worley had served his full sentence, or if the system had recognized the danger he posed, Sierah Joughin might still be alive. What investigators once thought was a shocking, one-time act of evil was now part of a long pattern, proof that this man had been perfecting his cruelty for decades, waiting for another chance to strike. In the months after Sierah's murder, her family refused to let her story end in tragedy. Out of the unbearable grief came a determination to make sure no one else's daughter would ever vanish the way Sierah had. Her mother, Sheila Vakulik, turned her pain into purpose. She began meeting with lawmakers, pushing tirelessly for a new law, one that would hold violent offenders accountable long after they left prison. That effort became Sierah's Law, officially known as Ohio Senate Bill 231, and it would change the state forever. Signed into law in December 2018, it created a publicly searchable database of people convicted of violent crimes, kidnappers, rapists, and murderers, so communities could know exactly who lived among them. It was the first legislation of its kind in the United States, and it came from a mother's vow that her daughter's death would not be in vain. Sheila said she wanted Sierah to be remembered not as a victim, but as a protector. And in many ways, she is. Every time someone checks that database, every time another potential tragedy is prevented, her legacy grows stronger. The law has since inspired similar proposals in other states, a ripple effect of awareness and accountability born from one young woman's light. Sierah Joughin was just 20 years old. She had dreams, love, and a future waiting for her, and though her life was stolen, her story became something larger than loss. It became a movement for safety and justice, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can rise from horror. Today, when the wind moves through the cornfields of Metamora, it carries the echoes of her laughter, her strength, and her mother's promise that Sierah's name will never be forgotten. Subscribe for more true crime stories where every case, no matter how dark, reveals the strength of those left behind.